The human brain relies on a specific biological mechanism to navigate an overwhelming environment: selective attention. This is the cognitive spotlight that allows the organism to filter out noise, lock on to relevant signals, and perform complex tasks. Clinical pioneer Milton Erickson observed that human beings enter highly focused states of selective attention every single day. Whether you are deeply absorbed in a repetitive task, following a compelling narrative, or conforming to a group consensus, you are utilizing this natural biological capacity. In clinical terms, this baseline state of narrowed focus, the narrowing of awareness to a single frame of reference, is a trance. Because this biological capacity for focus is constant, the question isn't whether we are entering trance states, but rather which external or internal forces are currently directing that focus. For most of recorded history, external institutions have recognized the power of this cognitive spotlight. Social hypnosis occurs when an institution successfully captures a population's selective attention and narrows it to serve an approved frame of reference. Against this institutional capture sits clinical hypnotherapy. Far from a parlor trick, it is a deliberate, targeted countermeasure designed specifically to help an individual reclaim their hijacked attention. This model compares two operators guiding cognition: the ancient haruspex, representing management architecture, and the modern hypnotherapist, representing counter-architecture. Both compete for the exact same territory: the precognitive moral substrate, the psychobiological compass that registers right or wrong before conscious thought occurs. What we call the architecture of consciousness management is the continuous historical effort by institutions to place filters over that substrate, ensuring the population's selective attention is directed strictly towards compliance, rather than independent moral judgment. To understand how to dismantle these filters, we first have to map exactly how institutions install them, and then examine the precise neurological bypass the clinical counter-architecture uses to restore the signal. Recognizing this ongoing competition for selective attention clarifies the role of the clinician. The hypnotherapist is acting as an architect of structural moral recovery. Institutional control begins structurally when a specific group claims exclusive access to knowledge that others cannot independently verify. One member of a group claims to know what the spirits want, and from that recurring founding gesture, administrative control over land, tax, and law follows. We see this codified with particular precision through the ancient Etruscan haruspices. This was a professional priestly class trained to read physical signs, like entrails and lightning, and translate them into rigid, codified rules governing everything from city founding to the structure of the afterlife. They called this exclusive knowledge the disciplina. When the pagan world collapsed, this fusion of religious authority and political administration did not disappear. It was absorbed directly into Roman and eventually Christian infrastructure. The title given to the head of the Roman priestly college, the Pontifex Maximus, remains the formal Latin designation for the Bishop of Rome today. The geometric precision of St. Peter's Square reflects this codified power. The architecture is designed to make the individual feel small and the institutional hierarchy feel immense, inevitable, and unchallengeable. This same dynamic governs modern secular life. When a regulatory agency abandons a straightforward added sugars labeling requirement due to sustained food industry pressure, the industry has successfully dictated the terms of reality. They have controlled what the consumer is allowed to know about the relationship between their diet and their health. This creates what is known as superintendence capture. The vanguard of specialists, whether ancient priests reading entrails or modern lobbyists drafting regulatory code, makes themselves so indispensable that the broader institution becomes entirely dependent on them to function. The specific theological claims or bureaucratic codes change across historical eras. The underlying architecture of a monopolized reality remains identical. This diagram illustrates the primary modern tool of that architecture: agnotology. This is the deliberate, strategic production of ignorance. By layering complex narratives, competing data, and dense bureaucracy, institutions obscure the actual mechanisms of their control. Psychologist Albert Bandura identified the cognitive counterpart to this structural confusion: moral disengagement. Individuals adopt specific psychological reframes, like euphemistic labeling or the displacement of responsibility, that allow them to participate in institutional harm without triggering their own internal moral alarms. Once these filters are installed, the individual's selective attention is narrowed strictly to the approved frame of reference. The social trance is complete. The harmful actions no longer register as harmful. Biologically, this mirrors the domestication of the wolf. Transforming an independent apex predator into a dependent domestic dog was achieved through multi-generational selective pressure. Breeders preferentially retained animals that exhibited reduced fear and aggression. In human institutional settings, the architecture applies selective social pressure, rewarding compliance and dependency while penalizing the expression of the natural moral compass when it conflicts with institutional interests. Because this pressure is sustained over generations, the resulting psychological traits feel like the baseline of human nature. We experience this domesticated state simply as the normal condition of life. Widespread moral disengagement functions as the intended output of this design. It represents a systemic success rather than a series of individual moral failures. However, the institutional trance has a hard biological limit. It cannot eliminate the natural moral compass. Viktor Frankl's documentation from within totalitarian concentration camps provides the observational proof. Even under an architecture explicitly designed to annihilate human agency, the capacity to choose one's inner orientation toward the circumstances remained intact. The moral substrate actively resists. Modern trauma neuroscience, guided by researchers like Bessel van der Kolk and Ernest Rossi, explains the psychobiology behind this resistance. This cross-section shows what actually happens to the suppressed moral compass. It is driven below the threshold of conscious cortical evaluation. It remains highly active in the limbic system, pulsing here at the base, but it is blocked from reaching conscious awareness by the installed cognitive filters. Because memories are dynamic structures that re-encode every time they activate, this trapped signal continues to press upward, creating acute internal friction. Clinicians see the result of this friction daily. It presents as persistent cognitive dissonance, anxiety without a specific trigger, and chronic somatic complaints. As van der Kolk noted, the body keeps the score of a moral conflict the conscious mind is not allowed to acknowledge. When a patient presents with this kind of free-floating anxiety, they are not exhibiting a pathology of their individual mind. They are experiencing the symptomatic expression of a healthy moral compass protesting a pathological social condition. Clinical hypnotherapy serves as the exact neurological mechanism required to address this trapped signal. Building on the naturalistic trance work of Milton Erickson, practitioners like Bandler and Grinder, and later Griffin and Terrell, formalized specific techniques to access this precognitive material safely. Here in the right column of our model, we see dissociation at work. The clinical technique allows the client's observing node to detach and step completely outside their usual overwhelmed neural loop. By processing the material from this safe observational distance, the limbic system avoids triggering defensive freeze, fight, or flight responses. The clinician takes the exact same biological capacity for selective attention that the social trance hijacked and redirects that spotlight downward, aiming it squarely at the suppressed internal material. Notice the route of the therapeutic signal. It circumvents the installed cognitive frames entirely. It does not try to argue with the agnotological filters. It travels around them to communicate directly with the limbic system. Because it engages the mechanism of memory reconsolidation, processing the material in this specific dissociated state actually re-encodes the memory. The organism achieves permanent structural change rather than merely endorsing a surface-level behavioral compliance. Clinical hypnotherapy succeeds because it bypasses the deliberate confusion of the management architecture, restoring access to the precognitive substrate where true moral discernment lives. When we merge these models to look at a recovered individual, we see the result of this bypass. The precognitive signal surges upward, dissolving the dense institutional filters and restoring a clear, continuous neural pathway. The ancient haruspex and the modern hypnotherapist share a precise operational similarity. Both claim access to the deep structure of human perception. Both are reading the raw, underlying signal that exists beneath the codified official story. The divergence lies in their application. The haruspex uses the organism's capacity for trance in the service of an institutional hierarchy, installing filters to manage behavior. The properly oriented hypnotherapist uses the exact same capacity for trance to dissolve those filters, acting strictly in the service of the person sitting in the room. Once a patient develops fluency with the somatic and affective signals of their own moral compass, they experience cognitive inoculation. By recognizing how their own substrate feels when activated, they gain structural immunity against future attempts to pull them into a social trance. The clarity of the natural moral compass does not have to be built from scratch. It has been actively registering the exact moral geography of the individual's situation all along, waiting to be accessed. Recovering the mechanism of selective attention functions as the ultimate act of reclaiming human moral agency. It moves the work from simple symptom management into the direct dismantling of a millennia-old architecture of control.